Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ambassadorial Wing. And I am your host, the Ambassador. Glad to have you all here this evening. Got a brand new panelist with me this evening. Got number one sci-fi. For those of you who may not be familiar with him, he is a regular on Stone Loki's Mornings of Mischief. He got in contact with me earlier today, and I was like, this is what I'm covering tonight. So. You want to come on and talk about Remember the Titans of Miracle? And he was like, sure. So number one sci-fi, or sci-fi if you prefer me to just call you that. Welcome. Glad you could join me this evening.
Hey, no problem, man.
So, and to everyone that's coming into the chat, I know we just literally started. To my moderator, Shay Storm Dragon, always here, always on time. Thank you for being here again, my dear. Glad you could join us this evening. And tonight, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we're going to be talking about a couple more Disney movies or anything, but we're going to be switching things up a little bit. And we're going to be talking about Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington and The Miracle with Kurt Russell. And as people start to roll in, I see one of my other moderators, Kathia Starr. Kathia, good evening, ma'am. How you doing? And no, foosball is not the devil, but I do get the joke. I do get the reference. As I started to say, Sci-Fi here is brand new, and I have put the link to his channel down in the description, so make sure you pop on to his channel, give him a subscribe, check out some of his stuff. He is a newer channel, but happy to have you on tonight. And I know the last several times I've done these Disney movie streams, we've talked about animated films, we've talked about live action, everything, and more science fiction type of stuff. But in this instance, everything that's going on with the country and everything in the world in general, with the coronavirus and all that's been going on, I thought it would be nice to take a look back at some things that have gone on in the nation and in the world and everything before all this came up, and just do a little discussion on these films, kind of see how they relate to what we're going through currently, and have some fun this evening, because in my opinion, these are very good movies. And we're going to start off with Remember the Titans. So Sci-Fi, your thoughts on this film?
Well, I mean, it's a really good film about how the integration of the football players onto the team, basically. And of course, at first they don't get along, which is a usual kind of a trope for sports movies in particular.
Yeah.
And it's just trying to get everybody to work as a team, because obviously football is a team sport.
Yeah.
And, obviously the controversy, I guess, mainly in this movie is how the head coach, who's a white person, is replaced by Denzel Washington's character, who's, a black person. And at the time, this is based on
this was in the if I remember correctly, this is in the 1960s. And to the chat, to Del Ciso Bruno, good evening. Thank you for popping in this evening. Hope you enjoy.
1971 on the Wikipedia. So
okay,
hopefully that's right. But growing up, hey, hello, Kathy. I started growing up in the 70s myself, mainly, because I remember that decade very well. With the, usually the main thing you hear about the 70s is, oh my God, you had the oil crisis, and cars backed up for miles and miles and miles and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that they touch on during Miracle as well. But a couple of things I found interesting about Remember the Titans, this movie took place before I was even born. That's true. Well, some of the events in Miracle took place before I was born. And that's something that has always been of interest to me, is movies that took place in the decades before I even came into the world and everything. And the thing that I liked about Remember the Titans is it gives a very interesting picture of just how divisive this whole idea of integrating the schools and everything in particular. And if I remember correctly, this takes place. Uh, I'm trying to remember where exactly where Remember the Titans took place and what state. I'm thinking it was Virginia.
Yeah, Alexandria, Virginia.
That's what I figured, because they drive to Gettysburg and everything later on in the movie. And this was the late 60s, early 70s was a very tumultuous time, obviously, for the country. And this movie gives a very good image of just how tense things were with the whole idea of integrating the school systems. And what you have with this film is, obviously, you have the whole issue of Denzel Washington's character coming in, Coach Boone and everything, coming in and replacing, I know the last name of the actor's name is Patton, but I can't for the life of me remember his first name. But
Will Patton. Yeah.
Will Patton, thank you. Yeah, because he's done a lot of good movies. The one that I remember him best for is actually Gone in 60 Seconds with Nicolas Cage and Angelina Jolie and Robert Duvall. But honestly, I think he played this part very well, and I think the fact that they kept this movie fairly historically accurate was a nice touch and everything, because they could have adapted this in any number of ways. But the fact that they kept it historically accurate, at least to a point. I imagine they did take a little artistic license with it, but they didn't go too extreme on it and everything, was a nice touch, because it's a lot more believable to the audience if you don't go way out on left field or anything when you're dealing with something like this.
Well,
and go ahead.
They probably did dial back a little bit of the violent parts of what was actually occurring, obviously.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think because they don't want to go too hard on this, because I imagine that Coach Boone and his family, they met a lot of, or they dealt with a lot of discrimination, a lot of bias and what have you from the community that they were coming into, and in particular within the school and with the other school officials and so on, and the town officials and what have you. And the one part about this movie that I really appreciated was the fact that you did get a sense of how difficult it probably was for the kids on both sides, just how difficult it was for them to try and build bridges with one another and try and come to an understanding where they could work side by side, where they could be amicable and civil with one another. And I think the way that they approached it and everything, in particular when they go off to training camp and everything up in Pennsylvania near Gettysburg, was a very nice touch, because I know that anything from the movie itself that the players from both sides, obviously, they had their own biases, they had their own prejudices and so on, and unfortunately that to an extent is going to be expected. But the thing that I liked is, over time, those biases and those misunderstandings and what have you started to break down. They really started to come together as a team. And the part that I liked, one part of it that I liked, and anything that they did was, you see the captain of the team, Craig Bertier, or anything, who starts off very much as a antagonist and everything. He's got his bias and everything about this, for lack of a more severe term. He's got a very strong bias and everything. He's very much against this whole idea of integrating the football teams or integrating the schools in general. And also, very much so. His mother was very much against this whole idea and what have you. But what you see throughout the course of the movie is you have Greg Bertier's character and you have the other character. I'm trying to think. He was the other team captain, but I can't think of his name off the top of my head. They start to come to an understanding, and you start to see the other characters. And the one character and everything, the heavyset guy who's the lineman and everything, he's very much accepted by the black players and everything. Some of them are a little like, what's up with this guy? He's acting very, very odd. The rest of these white guys over here are like, they all much by and large, they don't trust us, they don't understand us, they kind of hate our guts, and you've got this one white guy, this one white boy and everything, who's basically, he's like, hey, I don't see race. He's like, all I hear is, hey, I heard somebody say play football, and he's like, I come running. And you have the other character who they nicknamed Sunshine and everything because he's from out in California. And he's kind of an outsider as well to both sides of the thing, everything, both the white players and the black players. And over time, they start to come together as a team. Now, you've still got a few problem players and everything, in particular, Gary Bertier's one friend and everything, who causes the quarterback to get hurt and everything, during, I think it's the first game, and gets knocked out, and they bring in Sunshine as the replacement quarterback. And Gary goes to Coach Boone, Denzel Washington's character, and says, hey, we need to cut my friend. But the problem is, this is a friend that he's grown up with since childhood, and what have you. And Boone is like, well, you know how I feel. He's like, you know my policy, you know my position on cutting players. He's like, yeah, I know, but he's like, he's not going to work. He's not going to work within the system you're trying to build here. And he's like, and I know this. And Bertier goes to his friend and says, look, you're out. And the guy's like, what do you mean I'm out? He's like, you're not working with the team. You caused one of our own players to get hurt. You're going to be nothing but a detriment to the team, and you're not going to help us grow and come together as a unit. And if you have a divided sports team of any kind, that team is going to suffer, and they're not going to be able to perform as well as they could. But the thing, one of the pivotal moments of this movie is during training camp, where they wake up the boys bright-eyed early in the morning and have them go on a long run. And they go to the battlefield in one of the cemeteries there at Gettysburg. And Boone gives this very rousing speech and everything and says, look, these guys fought on this field, and they bled, and they died, and they suffered, so that this country would not be torn apart. And Boone's like, if we do not come together now, then just like how this country was almost torn apart 100 plus years ago, it'll be torn apart now because of everything that's going on in terms of us breaking down the walls of segregation and everybody being integrated together, and in particular with this team. And what you see throughout the course of the movie is, as the team, as the Titans succeed, the town starts to accept them, start to accept this idea. And one other part, that there is another moment and everything, it's when the team is starting to really hit a streak, and the other co-captain, the black co-captain, comes in, and he's in Gary Bertier's neighborhood, and you have a police officer pull up and everything in his patrol vehicle. And the black player is very uncomfortable. He's very, very nervous. And the cop says, y'all did a good job last night. And he's like, thank you. He's like, keep it up. And he just drives on. And Gary finally comes out. He's like, come on in. I want to introduce you to my mom. And his mom comes. He goes in, and you can see through their picture window there in at the Bertier's house, the young guy and everything picks up his mom and gives her a great big hug, and she doesn't know how to take it. But any of your thoughts on anything I just said, sci-fi?
Yeah, I mean it's a very emotional story, especially when Bashir is injured,
Yeah.
from the car accident,
Hmm.
and then he's still cheering on the team despite his
Yeah.
injury and
Hmm.
everything, and obviously during the semifinal game, the game is rigged,
Yeah.
basically, and the
Yeah.
refs are on the side of, I guess, some kind of chairman who wants the team to lose so that they can fire Boone, basically.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Well, go ahead.
yeah, and because of that, he says, "Hey, if you don't, I don't care if And obviously, by him talking to the referees and telling them, "Hey, I want you to officiate this game as any regular game that you would officiate," and him saying that, cost him his shot at the Hall of Fame, but you
Hmm.
know, but still, he held to his principles, despite
Yeah.
backing Coach Boone, you know.
Yeah. And the thing the thing that I loved is one of the other dynamics in the movie that I absolutely loved was how the two oldest daughters, Boone's oldest daughter and Will Patton's character, his daughter. His daughter is just, she's actually the narrator throughout the majority of this movie and everything. And I like the fact that they do tell this kind of from her perspective, her point of view, which was actually a nice change. I mean, they could have very easily told this from the perspective of Denzel Washington's or Will Patton's character, but they picked Will Patton's character's daughter. They picked her, and I thought that was a very nice touch because you get a very authentic and um, personal perspective from this because she was like the mini assistant coach. She was telling the guys, "Hey, you need to hit harder. You need to do this properly." She could break down film as well as any other coach that I've seen. And the thing that she says at the beginning of the movie is, "Well, Mama left, and I stayed. I stayed with Coach." And she really recalled her dad, but she referred to him as Coach. And I thought that was also a nice little touch and what have you. But what you have with the dynamic of the two oldest daughters, Boone's daughter and Patton's daughter, is the fact that one is very much a football fan, one is a tomboy. She doesn't wear dresses or anything, and Boone's daughter is always in dresses. She's playing with dolls and what have you, and she's like, "I'm accessorizing," and Boone's like, "Why don't you go accessorize with?" He's with I think the oldest daughter's name was Cheryl or something like that, and she's like, "I don't want to accessorize. I want to study film with you." And to this chat coming in, Adega Outlaw, speaker for the dead. Greetings. Glad y'all could tune in this evening. Um, we've been talking about Remember the Titans for the last few minutes and everything, and I think that was another good way of building a rapport with the audience and into the movie is showing different dynamics within the film, showing these different people from these different backgrounds coming together in a time when everybody else in the world, or at least everybody in the country, was saying these things should not mix. And honestly, I think that was another nice touch because you've got Bertier and the other player that are at odds for a while, but they finally come to an understanding. You have Boone and the former head coach who were kind of at odds for a while, but they start to come together and they start to come to an understanding with one another, and just the people in the town. They start to ease up and they start to realize, hey, these guys are just wanting to play football, get an education, and live their lives. And they're no different than the kids that have been living here all their lives and everything. They just want a better life and they want to play football. And ultimately, this one team brings the whole bloody town together. And when you have something like that happen, it's a very beautiful, it's a very powerful moment. It's something that you don't see very often, except under extraordinary circumstances. And I think what these kids in the town in general were going through were extraordinary circumstances, for the simple fact that pretty much everywhere in the country, and I can't speak from firsthand experience because desegregation and everything took place before I was born, but from what my mother and my grandmother and my father and my uncle have told me and everything, where they grew up and everything, and that was in Kentucky and Indiana. Particularly in Kentucky, there were those that were very staunchly against integration and what have you. But then there were others who were just like, look, these kids want to get a decent education. They want to live their lives, and they don't want trouble, and they don't want to cause any trouble. And I remember one story that my grandmother told me. There was a protest at the junior high where my uncle was going to school at the time, and you had people picketing outside the high school, and she had to take my uncle to school. She was taking him to school and everything pretty much every day. And you had all these protesters outside the school and everything who were shouting and hollering and everything, pretty much kind of like what you see, probably more and maybe even more severe as what you see at the beginning of Remember the Titans. And something that she told me and everything is my grandfather was a vet from World War II, and he was able to keep some of his gear, some of his equipment. And she would carry his service bayonet and everything on certain occasions and everything if she felt it was warranted. And in this particular instance, when she was walking my uncle into the junior high, somebody got in her way. She pulled the bayonet and everything out of its scabbard and said, look, I'm taking my son into the school. I don't care how much screaming and hollering you do, but you either move out of my way or you're going to get a hole in you. And the person backed off. And, that's something that seeing this movie very much brought home that whole story for me. And I think it's something that we very much need to look at nowadays or anything, considering all the divisiveness that's going on with the country, in particular with the whole issue of the virus and how it's affecting everybody's lives and what have you. And you've got people on both sides that are screaming and hollering. You've got a certain group of people on one side that are screaming and hollering. You've got another group on the other side who are saying, look, we just want to live our lives. We want to have some sense of normalcy again. So quit your doing what you're doing, because all you're doing is causing more trouble than what we need right now, and we've got enough troubles as it is. Sci-fi?
Yeah, agree with you. Yeah, agree with you 100%. Yeah, it's like stop griping and just do what you can to help each other out as much as you can, because yeah, it's not fun being cooped up and stuff like that. Because I mean, I barely went out at all last week. And it gets very boring just sitting around, basically trying to pass the time doing something.
Yeah. Well, and to kind of get back on track in terms of the movie, I know some people will say that this movie is very cheesy, very corny, and how it kind of resolves itself. But honestly, in life, resolution resolving differences between groups doesn't always have to be a big overdrawn, blown up thing. It can be done with work as long as both sides are willing to come to an understanding with one another. And what you have with this movie, as I've kind of mentioned previously, is the fact that people in this town, the players on this team, were willing to a degree, and it got easier for them as time went on to work together as a group, particularly the players on the team, which was obviously the focus of the movie. But the thing that was, I think one thing that I really liked about this movie was the soundtrack, because it was very much quintessential 60s, late 60s and 70s music and everything. It was a lot of country rock and stuff like that. And it really framed the picture, it really framed the movie so well that you got the sense of, you got storytelling, both the visual, but you also got storytelling with the music, as the people were coming together as a community, and the team was coming together, and they were succeeding, and they were moving, and they were growing as people. They were coming to understanding with one another, and they finally were able to break down all those walls that are so easy to keep up between us and everything, to where we don't grow and we don't change and we don't evolve as people. And unfortunately, that is Speaker. Thank you. Yeah, Speaker for the Dead. He said it very perfect. He said it very well. We are like puzzle pieces. Our funny edges fit together somehow. Yeah, I would honestly, yeah, I think that's a very good assessment. And Del Cecil Bruno said, as long as both sides are willing to cooperate, things can get done and problems get solved. Yeah, very much so. And I think that was the main thrust of this movie, was they were trying to get this idea across that we are not that different on the surface. We may be different on the surface, but deep down, we all strive for similar things. And I can't quote this exactly, but it's a speech that was given by JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. We all inhabit this one small world. We all hope for a better future for our children. And we are all mortal. And I think this movie very much encapsulates that whole ideal that we are all mortal. We all want a better future for our children. And that's what this team, by coming together, was ultimately able to do, was build a better future for themselves and for their children and for their communities. And that is that's a very powerful and a very beautiful message, truth be told.
So, yeah, I mean, that's always good to be recognized in I guess the area you grow up as being, again, there for somebody if they need mm-hmm. your help or anything like that.
Yeah.
And this country in a way has gotten away from the helping your neighbor thing, kind of, to just everybody's out for their own type of thing, Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is in some ways very true, but I think so long as we're still willing, I think there's a larger demographic of people that is willing to work together with one another than those that that are more pessimistic and more narrow-minded, and all they want to do is be dividers and not uniters. And in a lot of ways, the coaches on the Titans team, they were very much uniters. I mean, they had their issues and everything. They bumped heads and everything on how to coach the team, how to run things, and so on. But they eventually were able to put aside their differences and say, "Hey, look, we're all wanting to do the same thing. We're all wanting to coach football. We're wanting to make these young men better people through our example and whatnot." And over time, they were able to do that. So, I think one other part of this that they didn't show a whole lot of the bigotry and the hate and everything that was shown that would have probably been more prevalent during this time. But the one moment that I do appreciate they did put in was the part where Will Patton's daughter, the wife, everything, was over at Coach Boone's house, and you have somebody drive by and chuck a rock through their window and call him. Well, I won't repeat it or anything. But calls him something very derogatory, and Will Patton's character goes to Boone and says, "Look, I don't think it's a good idea and he's not antagonistic or anything. I'm just putting a little more emphasis on what he says. He's like, look, I don't think it's the best idea if my daughter comes over to your house anymore because of what happened." And Boone's like, "Well, for this is brand new to you, but me and my family, we've been dealing with this for years." And he's like, and Will Patton's character is like, "Yeah, I can see how much I can see that. I can understand where you're coming from on that." And he kind of has a change of heart and everything. And that actually, I think, is the moment where Will Patton's character does start to his attitude does start to change, because he does see how much Boone does care about the players, does care about the town and the community and everything, and wants to be successful and wants to see these young men succeed. So, and of course, you've got they ultimately go on to win the championship. But I think the bigger victory is ultimately the fact that they were able to work through all that conflict and all that headbutting and all that other stuff, and they were able to ultimately achieve their goal. And Exner Comics, greetings, Trey. Good to see you, friend. And Speaker, yeah, I can understand what you're saying and everything. I mean, these types of movies are not everybody's cup of tea. Everything. And Speaker says, "I'm not the biggest fan of these types of movies, but I really did like Denzel Washington's performance in this." Yeah, Denzel Washington. This is one of his best movies, I honestly think. I mean, I am a fan of Denzel Washington's work. I remember him from his earliest days when he was in movies like Virtuosity with Russell Crowe, and I remember him from Glory and so on. And he's grown on me as an actor, truth be told. I haven't seen some of his later work. I do remember one that he did a few years ago and everything with when I think it was Dakota Fanning was a kid. It was called Man on Fire, and that was I think honestly that was one of his best. That was one of Denzel Washington's best roles right there, because the movie ends in a way you do not expect. So, but that being said, sci-fi, if you're good, I think we'll transition over to Miracle and everything. We'll talk about that for a little bit. So, this I had the opportunity to see both of these in theater and everything, and I was like, when I heard that when Miracle was coming out, I had heard about the real life event, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. And this is one, it took place right around the time that I was actually born and everything. I think it starts in 1976 or 77, somewhere along in there. And you've got the lead up, and you've got another top-notch cast and everything. And of course, you've got Kurt Russell, who absolutely owns it. And for those of you who may not know this, Kurt Russell actually has a very long history with Disney movies and everything. One of his earliest roles, I think, was, and it's actually a movie that we own. It's called The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit. But he's had a fairly long career and everything doing Disney films and everything. And honestly, this again, I think this is one of his best roles and everything, where he portrays Herb Brooks, the hockey coach who leads the 1980 men's hockey team to the gold and everything at the Winter Olympics. But this is another film where you get a snapshot of what the world looked like in the late 70s and going into 1980. And honestly, I love the whole aesthetic. I love the, I love how they were able to piece together a fairly accurate picture of what the world was like in the late 70s going into 1980 and leading up to this event. And sci-fi, your thoughts?
Okay, well, I mean, I was in my early teens, basically in 1980,
Mm-hmm.
when the Olympics were at Lake Placid.
Yeah.
And so I remember the thing is that they did not show this game live, okay?
Yeah, Shea just brought that up.
Believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
It was on tape delay. And
Hmm.
of course, before the internet, nobody still knew the outcome of the game,
Yeah.
between the US and the Russians,
Mm-hmm.
And, but yeah, I mean, I remember watching it on TV and, just being basically on the edge of my seat, especially in the third period,
Yeah.
when we were still down, but then, got it tied and then finally took the lead. And then, they kept on attacking and attacking and attacking the Russians to, try to even it up. But, luckily, the U.S. team was able to hold on and win the game, So, yeah, this just seeing this even on tape delay at the time was an awesome event, to watch, really,
Yeah, I honestly, I can only imagine what it was like to, I mean, just to listen to it on radio. I mean, I've done my fair share of that and everything throughout my life, listening to football games or baseball or whatever. And I'm not even the biggest baseball fan, truth be told. But I can, I can only, I love the fact that they have the audio from the game and everything playing throughout different parts of the movie and everything, particularly when they do get to the Olympic Games. They're in Lake Placid. But I will say I love the actress who played Kurt Russell as Herb Brooks or anything. I love the actress that played his wife, because I've seen her in several movies. And I'm trying to remember for life of me remember her name, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. I feel awful. I'm usually really good with names, but I love just how it seemed very real. It seemed very organic. It felt like this was a couple that had been together for years on end. They had raised a family and what have you, and they were like a hand in glove. They fit together very, very well. And I love the dynamic of the team. Most of these, unless I'm mistaken, most of these actors or anything who played the hockey players, these were not big name actors that they brought in. I think honestly the biggest names that you had was Kurt Russell and the guys who played the different officials for the Olympic Committee for the U.S. and what have you. But these young guys or anything who portrayed these fairly well known hockey players or anything from that team, like O'Callahan and Auger and all of them and Cox. I can't think of all of them, folks. So if you remember their names, put them in the chat and everything, and help me out here.
Yeah, well,
But go ahead.
Jim Craig was the goalie,
Yeah,
obviously.
Jim Craig. Yeah,
Was the goalie,
yeah,
and then everybody knows Michael Ruzioni because he was the
yeah,
one that scored the game winning goal, basically.
yeah.
So
So
those are probably the two most famous
yeah,
players from the team.
hmm yeah. I would agree with that, honestly. Shea, thank you. Patricia Clarkson, she was in the. Oh, she was. Dang, I forgot she was in the Untouchables, and she was in Green Mile. So Shea, thank you. Always coming in on with the coming with the pickup, and I appreciate it. Yeah, so, but Brooks was very hard on these guys, but he realized he had to be considering who they were going up against. He realized that the U.S. hockey system had to change. It had to change drastically if they were going to compete with the world at large. And he put these guys through the ringer. And some people would, and even the assistant coach and the team doctor were like, Herb, you're pushing these guys way too hard. And he's like, look, I know these guys. I've coached them, or I know them well enough to know that I can push them this hard. I built this team from the ground up. I know what I'm doing. You've just got to trust me. And throughout the course of this film, you see world events taking place in the background, seemingly. We've got the whole issue with President Carter button heads with the Russians at the time. And obviously, they're button heads with us as well. But of course, you've got the all these different egos and everything with the hockey team itself, and they're trying to understand what Brooks is saying and trying to understand what he's doing to them. And of course, you've got that one famous scene where I think they're in Sweden or Norway or somewhere, and the guys aren't focused on the game, and he keeps them after the game and makes them do I guess is what they call wind sprints or something like that, and they're running backwards and forwards, and he's blowing the whistle, and then, or he's telling the assistant coach, blow the whistle and send him. And the assistant coach gets to a point, he's like, Herb, I can't do it. And Herb's like, do it. And then one of the players actually figures out what Brooks is trying to get out of him. And the player says, I play for United States Hockey. I don't play for a specific team. And Brooks is like, okay, you're done. Go hit the showers. And the guys probably can't feel their legs at this point. Yeah, Shea, that's the scene that was quite literally the scene I was just talking about where, Brooks is, and he runs their butts into the ground. He's like a general marching his troops trying to march them off a cliff, essentially. But the one player finally figures out what Brooks is wanting out of him, and that's when the switch is flipped, and you start to get that montage of them starting to hit on all cylinders, and they're starting to really start to come together as a team. And of course, you've got that other part and everything where they are, they're really bonded together, and Brooks brings this other guy in and everything that hasn't been with them from the beginning. He's like, look, this guy's a hell of a hockey player. He can be a great asset to us. And they're like, no, he hasn't been here. He hasn't been busting his ass the way the rest of us have been. And Brooks is like, well, why? And the one player, I think it was O'Callahan who says, because we're a family and you're bringing an outsider into our family and we don't like it. And of course you've got those other parts, or you've got several other parts or anything of the movie where you see the Russians going up against the NHL All-Stars, and they make the NHL All-Stars look like a bunch of clowns, essentially.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Any All-Star game that's played is basically you're playing at an easy pace, basically, and a relaxed pace. You're not really there to per se win the game. You're just kind of there almost, And that's how obviously the players in an NHL who, why am I going to sacrifice, for this game that doesn't mean anything, you know, kind of thing. It's just an exhibition. So who cares if we win or lose? Almost type of a deal.
Yeah, very true. And I think Speaker made a comment a few minutes ago. Speaker, I highly recommend you watch this movie. It's one that I have watched several times. We have it on, I'm pretty sure we've got it on DVD. I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, we do have it on DVD. Never mind. It is a very uplifting. It is very funny. As you said, Speaker, like me, you grew up in the 70s and 80s and everything. You were a kid. And there's a face I was waiting to see would show up. Stories about Irish stories. Good evening, ma'am. I hope you're doing well. We're currently talking about Miracle and everything. We just got done talking about Remember the Titans, and we're talking about Miracle and everything with Kurt Russell. And again, you've got this. Brooks is like, look, these are just kids and everything playing hockey. And one of the Olympic Committee members is like, look, the country has gone through hell right now. We've gone through Watergate. We have gone through the Iran kidnapping and what have you. And people are hungry for something uplifting like this. The country, something within the country is doing well, and people are just absolutely latching on to this. And Brooks is like, okay, well, I get that, but at the same time, these are just kids playing hockey on the rink. But the guy's like, no, they're more than that. And I don't think Brooks, and maybe at the time Brooks didn't see it, but he may have seen it in hindsight, that this team was very much a symbol of American exceptionalism. That despite everything that has gone sideways and haywire with the country over the last several years, that there is something positive out there. There is something that is uplifting about this situation with this young team who is going against some of the very best hockey teams in the world, and they are succeeding. They are winning. And ultimately, it is quite literally a miracle that happens on that ice there in Lake Placid. And,
yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
They were huge underdogs. I mean, huge.
Yeah.
I mean, that nobody expected the U.S. to beat Russia. Nobody,
They didn't even expect the U.S. to get past the first or second round, really, much less get to the medal rounds.
Exactly.
From what I understand.
Right.
And for them to get as far as they did was just an absolute, miracle to not put too fine a point on it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't. I mean, and this is a real thing that occurred too. I mean, you can't write a better Hollywood type of story than this hockey team, and especially during this time period, 1980.
I mean, yeah, I remember when I was going to school as a kid, particularly when I got into junior high and high school. Well, especially high school, this was something that I learned about in history class and current affairs class when we were talking about the Cold War and what have you. And this movie wasn't around yet. This movie came out after I was out of high school, and I wish it had been made when I had been in high school, because this would have been a great snapshot for me and all my friends of what the world was like in the 1980s, because I was roughly 2 years old at the time. And I had no idea this was going on. Obviously, I was a toddler. And to learn about this in hindsight and realize, hey, this is something that nobody in this country, much less the entire world, expected to happen. For the U.S., hockey team to go out there, go up against some of the very best and the very best hockey team in the whole world and come out on top. And as you said, sci-fi, as very heavy underdogs. I mean, I would have loved to have been able to place a bet on that and everything for the Americans, and like that would have been very surprised. I would have been very surprised if that was something, in Back to the Future Part 2, where Griff goes back in time and everything. I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the bets that he placed that made him part of his fortune. Now talk about a possible crossover right there, Back to the Future and Miracle, in a matter of speaking. Because whoever placed bets on the Americans, they probably walked away looking like geniuses and everything because they bet on the underdog. Yeah. And you never ever bet on the underdog, but the fact that the U.S. team, even though one of their best players was out going into the games and everything, and they were still able to muscle their way through essentially and get to the medal game with the Russians. And the one thing I will say about this, I don't know where they found these actors to portray the Russian team and their coach and everything. But I've seen pictures of the Russian team and everything, and they got some pretty good ringers and everything for some of the more prominent players and what have you. And the other thing I will say about this, you feel those hits when those guys are on the ice. You feel them. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, I mean, hockey was all about fighting and hitting. And now, kind of like football, it's been neutered down to be more politically correct for the times and all this stuff. So it's gotten soft. I hate to say that word. It's sports have gotten soft based on how they used to be played and stuff like that. And and it's almost like the military. The military's done the same thing, going from being hardcore to being a little bit, more, easy. I guess not easier, but just
they're not as staunch. They're not as rigid.
Right. They give you more of a leeway.
And that's not doing them any favors. But
Yeah, I mean, back when I was growing up, if you didn't get a beating on your backhind from your parents, then they weren't doing their job correctly. And nowadays, you do that to your kid, and they're going to call for child services to take your kid away.
Yeah. Well, and my grandmother very much had that mentality, maybe not to the extreme that you're describing and everything. But my mother was very much, she believed in punishment, but she didn't believe in, having to lay a belt or anything across my backside and everything to get her point across. She tried to talk to me and everything. And new face and everything in the chat, Mando Merck. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it very much. We're currently we're currently talking about the movie Miracle from with Kurt Russell. So, but Brooks and everything. He really, as I've mentioned previously, he really put these guys through the ringer and everything to get them ready. And I love one of the lines that he says. He's like, the legs feed the wolf. He's like, you have to learn to grow through pain. You have to learn to grow through hardship, in a matter of speaking. But ultimately, he breaks them down and builds them back up. And these guys go out there and in that last game and everything with the Russians, they make the Russians look like they're skating all over themselves, in a matter of speaking. And it's honestly kind of comical because the Russian coach is like, I don't know what the heck to do here. He's like, we've never been down and we've never been in a situation like this and everything. And he even pulls the arguably the greatest goalie of the time and puts his backup in because the Americans score, I think, what is it, 1 or 2 goals in the first couple of in the first period or whatever, and he uses the backup for the remainder of the game. And it's amazing to me the fact that Brooks gets these guys to believe in his system and they finally buy into it. And you see the payoff of everything that he puts them through. All of the hardship and all of the back-breaking practices and everything else. Yeah, Trediak. Yeah, Shea. Yep, he was. Yeah, back then Trediak was the best goalie in the world, except for maybe our guy and everything,
Right. And,
Jim Craig. Go
and
ahead.
yeah, he had given up basically a soft goal with just 1 second left in that
Mm-hmm.
first period. And yeah, the coach was like, "Oh hell, yeah, I'm going to pull your butt because yeah, Russians don't accept failure, Um, so yeah, he yanked him. It was tied 2-2 at the end of that first period, and of course then the Soviets led 3-2 after the second, and
Mm-hmm.
then obviously the third period is when the U.S. tied it and then scored the game winner, you know. But yeah, again, just relating it back to the day, back in the '80s, yeah, I mean, stuff was a lot hotter. Yeah, I mean, shit, I was working for, you know, $3 an hour or whatever it was way back
Mm-hmm.
when, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And now it's all about sports are all about the entertainment aspect of it more than the game itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, as I've mentioned, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s and everything. And sports then, I think, were not as, I don't think they were as diluted and watered down as they are nowadays because honestly, anymore, you can't even get me to watch a football game. But I'll sit down and watch something like Remember the Titans or something along those lines.
I mean, yeah, it's more about your fantasy team and what they can
Yeah.
score than the actual game nowadays. Because there's like multiple outlets out
Oh,
there that you can, you know, Yahoo and ESPN and all of them that you can, you know, basically join a group of other people and have a fantasy team, and you play
yeah.
based on who you draft for your quarterback and
Mm-hmm.
or if it's hockey, your goalie and your goal scorers and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, the '80s, was also the time when hockey. I think that was basically the last time that the Rangers, New York Rangers, won the Stanley Cup too. Was in the '80s, if I'm right, um,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I mean, you had a time when it used to be the Montreal Canadiens would be the team that basically won the cup a lot during the '70s and '60s and stuff like that. And only once they expanded the league,
Yeah.
basically, did you start having these other teams then, you know, that were not your usual powerhouses winning the Stanley Cup and everything.
Hmm. Interesting. That was something I didn't even know. And the other thing that I loved, and everything kind of the same thing with Remember the Titans. I loved the music in this movie, particularly they had Queen playing at the end with the end credits and everything. You saw the careers that the different players went on to have after the fact. They didn't actually. Some of them did stay in hockey to one extreme or another, but they went on to just have normal lives and everything. But this was their one moment in the sun, and then of course you have that very interesting. You have that voiceover by Brooks at the end where he's talking about the fact that a few years after the Miracle on the Ice in Lake Placid, the U.S. would start to, and the Olympics would start to allow professional sports players onto the teams, and they had the dream teams. I remember the first dream team and everything for the United States for basketball and what have you. And honestly, I can see what Brooks was saying when they started having these dream teams. We stopped dreaming.
Yep.
Because if you've got a bunch of essentially ringers that are playing and everything, well, you can pretty much figure that professionals are going to do better than people that play maybe semi-pro or amateur or whatever, but they're exceptionally good at what they do. And let's face it, in the 80s, the late 80s and the 90s, we had some of the best basketball players in the world here in the States. And what have you.
Oh, yeah.
And we absolutely just dominated the rest of the teams and everything. And, in a lot of ways, them making that move to allow professional players into the Olympics kind of in a way, for at least for a while, caused us as a nation to stop dreaming. And that's unfortunate.
Right. It got to be, about the money that you could make off of the team versus the team itself.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, yeah. Now that we got NBA players and professional players, now we can really, get more money for broadcasting it, more money, more people are obviously watching it versus then and stuff like that. And, people are going to want to watch, obviously, professional players versus college, or non-professional, So unfortunately, the Olympics had to bend the rules a little bit to allow that, especially for the team sports. At least for the other things, usually like track and field and swimming and stuff like that, it's still pretty much, on an amateur kind of basis, or and stuff like that. But you're still going to have your famous Michael Phelps type of swimmer or whoever is going to still make a ton of money based on how well he does in the Olympics.
Yeah. So, well, I think the last point I wanted to touch upon and everything, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to cover these two movies tonight, is kind of tying it back into everything that we're going through right now and everything. I know we've touched upon it a little bit, but there's one other there's one further point that I wanted to make and everything, and sci-fi, I wanted your perspective on this as well. This country has gone through desegregation and has gone through a lot of tensions between the races and everything that make up this country. And of course, we have gone through a lot of political drama and everything in terms of what was going on in the miracle and everything in the background. And yet, in those two instances, you saw people come together and you saw them reaching out to their neighbors, reaching out to people they didn't even know, and saying, we are a community, we are a nation, and despite everything that we have gone through, this is just, as I said earlier, this is just another trial that we will eventually get over. We will get past this virus. We will get past the impact it has had on our economy and on our society and everything else. But ultimately, we will become the better for it. Because if you look at these two movies and everything that was going on in them, it really shows you the heart of the American people. And obviously, you've been around a fair side. You've been around a little bit longer than I have, and I just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, 70s was basically or late 60s was your Vietnam era, basically. And just coming out of that, quagmire, to put it lightly. and there was a lot of difficulties with um, even the which they've done plenty of movies on as well, of the people
Mhm.
returning from the war and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And you know, it just shows that yes, you can come together as a community and stuff like that. But there's still others out there that are hurting and still need help. You know,
Yes.
it's not, unfortunately, it's not all for one and one for all.
No,
You
it
know,
isn't, sadly. But you know, and to all of you who have been here through this, I hope this stream's been entertaining. I know this is a little bit of a change of pace for me and everything, but as I said, this is something that I felt need to be spoken on. I think these are two movies that very much relate to the current situation we're going through right now. And for those of you that'll catch this on the replay, I hope you found what me and Sci-Fi have talked about tonight and everything enlightening. I hope you've, if you have not seen either Remember the Titans or Miracle, it encourages you to do so, because honestly, these are two very worthwhile films. They're exceptionally well acted. They were very well put together, well written, and what have you. So, I very much encourage you. These are currently on Disney Plus, to the best of my knowledge, or if you have them yourself, go back and revisit these, because these are two pictures of what this country has gone through in its past, and we've come out of it stronger, and we will get through what we're going through with the coronavirus now, and we again will come out of it stronger. So, but I want to thank y'all for tuning in tonight. I want to thank Sci-Fi for coming on and everything. I appreciate it, and Sci-Fi, I look forward to working with you down the road. Is there anything that you want to mention that's coming up on your channel or anything before we close out?
Yeah, I'll be doing some more stuff with Vance Major Owen, showing
Yeah.
his movies that he does for no budget productions of his Constar Chronicles films,
Yeah.
and yeah, various other content.
Okay. Well, and folks, just a couple of updates on my channel. This Friday night, I will actually be on Orange Hat Reviews channel. He's doing one of his versus streams, and we will be debating. We'll be discussing how a fight would turn out between Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, and Chung Li from Street Fighter. So, if I remember correctly, that's at 8 Central Time, 9 Eastern. So be sure and check out. I'll be over there on Orange Hat, so check him out. Of course, on my channel and everything, this Saturday night, 7:30 Central Time, we'll be having Ambassadorial Wing, and we'll be doing our discussion on music of the 1980s, and we will be having our karaoke night. I am putting together my panel for that, so be sure to tune in. And
I've definitely seen some songs to the 80s, man. There's no doubt about that.
okay. And one other thing, I will be on Star Wars Rogues podcast. I'll be on his other channel called Rogues Hub. That'll be at 4 p. That'll be at 4 p.m. I think Central Time, if I remember correctly, when we're going to be talking about The Simpsons. So be sure and check out Rogues Hub and everything. That's Star Wars Rogues podcast alternate channel and everything that he has recently started. So if you have not subscribed to him, I definitely encourage you to do so. If you not have subscribed to Number One Sci-Fi, I have put the link to his channel down in the description. I know Shaya has shared it out several times, so give this guy and everything some support and everything, and check out some of his content, subscribe, and all that stuff. So, but I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. My moderators, Shea Stormdragon, and of course, Kathia Star. I know she had to leave early, and I understand that. But everybody that was here this evening, Accent Comics, Speaker for the Dead, The Daga Outlaw, Stories by Irish, and Mando Merc. And I appreciate y'all very much. And hope y'all have a good night. And until next time. This is the Ambassador signing off.